Hi everybody, thanks for taking the time to watch this video with us. I'm Elaine from the charity Cerebra, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Leanne Tattam from Birchall Blackburn Law, who's going to be having a chat to us about education, health and care plans. And Leanne has written a fantastic article for our website, which is really detailed, and today we're just going to be talking through that, through the main points, and giving lots of advice and pointers really. So welcome Leanne, lovely to meet you.
Thank you, lovely to meet you too.
And thanks for joining us. So before we get sort of stuck into the education healthcare plans, can you just sort of introduce yourself, say a little bit about you and the law firm?
Yeah, of course. So as a firm, we're based predominantly in the Northwest, but we act for clients across England and Wales. We always go and see families in their home or at hospital, wherever they feel comfortable, really. But we do have 7 offices spanning across, I have to count them, Morecambe, Chester, Southport, Preston, Chorley, Leyland and Manchester, which is where I'm based, along with our serious injury team. We cover all areas of private client work, including wills, trust and probate, family, residential conveyancing, court protection, industrial disease, personal injury, clinical negligence and serious injury work. We're therefore very much a firm that's been built to support members of the public with their legal needs. A little bit about me. I'm a partner in the firm, specialising in both catastrophic injury and clinical negligence work, usually where an accident or alleged clinical negligence has sadly led to somebody suffering an acquired brain injury. I do act for both adults and children, but in all cases I work alongside not just the injured person and their litigation friend, but the whole family, offering support in any way we can, really. So that's really the reason for our talk today, because this is something I'm quite often asked to help get involved in.
Great. Oh, thank you for that. So, because I have very little knowledge around this area, can you just explain, what is an education, health and care plan? It's quite a long title, isn't it? It's Ehcp for short.
Yeah, so an educational health and care plan, or EHCP, is a legal document that identifies your child or young person's educational, health and care needs. It sets out in detail what support is required to meet those needs as well. I will assume for the purposes of talking through this today that it's generally going to be to parents viewing it and looking to ensure one is in place for their child. So I will refer to your child throughout, but it is worth bearing in mind that it is also relevant to a young person aged between 16 and 25 going on to higher education, in which case it's a legally binding contract with them themselves.
Okay.
Part of the reason one is so important is because it is a contract between the local educational authority, health and social care, and you as the child's parents, and it should provide a clear structure of support for any difficulties your child has, along with identifying what must be put in place to help your child work towards the outcomes that you're looking to be achieved. Being a legally binding contract, the local authority is obliged to actually ensure all the provisions of the EHCP are carried out, and more importantly, fund them if necessary. Plus, if they don't, then you as the child's parents have the right to take the matter to tribunal and or judicial review, which is usually enough of a deterrent to make sure that all the provisions are funded.
Okay. So, if your child has a brain injury, why is this plan so important? How can it help?
So it really is the best way to get the additional support that a child is likely to need following a brain injury to make the most of their education. How that's kind of gone about, I would say, differs somewhat on a number of factors, including whether the child is already at school when they sustain their brain injury, or if it was sustained at birth or during the early years, then that's obviously has a bit of a different impact. If they are at school, it also makes a difference whether the school are supportive of getting an Ehcp assessment completed. But if parents are lucky enough to already have a school on board with applying for an EHC assessment, it's likely they'll get the ball rolling anyway. But if the child is at preschool age, then there is nothing stopping parents writing directly to the Director of Children's Services at their local authority and asking for an assessment to be undertaken.
And when I was reading the article that you've written for us, I realised that there are 11 sections plan, which seems like a lengthy and a little bit of a daunting list to me. Can you just sort of explain what these sections are and just, give people an overview of what to look at?
Yeah, of course. But I think it is also worth highlighting at the outset that not every part of the Ehcp assessment is completed by parents, and some sections can be appealed, whilst others can't. So I'll go on to explain a bit more about that, but not everything that's in there parents need to get overly concerned about. So I think that's the first thing that really does need stressing.
Yeah, so, quite reassuring.
Yeah. So the 11 sections of the Ehcp are Section A, where you set out the views, interests and aspirations of your child and your own. Section B, which describes your child's special educational needs. Section C sets out your child's health needs as reported by healthcare professionals involved in the child's care. Section D sets out your child's social care needs, which is provided by a member of the social care team. That can be a social worker or a family support team member. Section E states the outcomes that are sought for the child. Section F describes the special educational provisions required by your child, which the local authority has to provide. Section G, that outlines any healthcare provisions reasonably required for the learning difficulties and disabilities that result in the child having special educational needs. That's something that the area's clinical commissioning group have a duty to provide, and that's also set out by the healthcare professionals involved. It can be done by a letter or completion of a form that gets sent to the Ehcp coordinator. Section H lists any social care provision, and again that's completed by the social work team. I names the educational placement for your child to attend. J makes arrangements for a personal budget, and K highlights any advice and information. So when it comes to parents kind of getting their heads around this, really, Section A is really very, very important because that is completed by them. And, as a parent, you should keep in mind that no one knows your child as well as you do. And what is set out as your child's aspiration is not something that can be challenged. So you can include photos of your child in here if you want, along with any quotes as to what your child says they want to achieve. If your child's only 5, it might be a tad early to set out their future employment aspirations, but it can be more short-term than that. And it could be that their aspirations are to go to school and make friends. There are some questions posed on the form for families and parents in particular to consider, but not every one of them has got to be answered. So if parents don't think something's relevant, then just don't answer it. But all the questions should be deleted prior to submission of the form.
Right.
I think for parents, what is important to get across is the structure of the family unit, who is important to the child, if you can, the child's views on their home or current setting, what they like and don't like, what things interest them, who their friends are, what's important to them, and what people admire about them, as far as you can, because those are all things that only really a mum and dad know. So that's really key to get across, because no healthcare professional or anybody else is going to be able to say that. Section A is also the parent's chance to set out what life has been like so far, including the child's medical and educational history, good and bad significant events that have happened to the child, the things as a parent you feel your child needs support with, the people who support them, and here for parents that does include them and the wider family, and anything that isn't going very well. So those are all things that really do need to be kind of elaborated on.
Yeah.
All the other sections will be completed by professionals involved in the assessment after the review meetings happened, and parents do need to attend that review meeting to give input into those other sections. So
Okay.
I'll go through the key ones,
please,
if that helps.
Yeah.
So Section B is completed by professionals involved and the Ehcp coordinator in the special educational needs team if the school's already involved. This is a section where parents can add additional information now, and the section should really set out what the child's special educational needs are. So that can be tiredness, lacking attention or concentration, memory issues, problems interacting with others, communication problems, limited capacity to analyse and plan, issues with coordination, difficulty controlling their emotions and their medication needs. So that all needs to go into Section B. My tip to parents would be, if it's possible, to have somebody from your child's school attend the discharge planning meeting before your child leaves hospital if they're already at school when they develop their brain condition, because that way the person from school will hear firsthand from the healthcare professionals what difficulties the child may now have. Section E, that should list the outcomes desired for your child. So that's the benefits or change that you want to make because of the additional support being put in place for their needs. So an example of that could be as an outcome to be able to mobilise independently, or to be able to use public transport independently in the local area by a certain age. The other really key sections, I think, are sections F and I, basically because they can be appealed by parents as well as the other two if they disagree with the decisions. So we'll come on to that in a bit. So Section F, that must cover all the special educational provision that is required by your child and describe what it will take to meet all the needs set out in Section B to achieve all the outcomes set out in Section E, which is why I've gone through those in a bit of detail. So just as an example, let's say that you identify in Section B that your child has severe dysarthria, making their speech difficult to understand, and as a result of their brain condition, they've got difficulty expressing their emotions. You might have said in Section E, one of the outcomes is for them to be able to communicate their wants and needs effectively. So in Section F, the method of getting there is what you include. So that could be to have speech and language therapy along with neuropsychology timetabled into their school day. And I think parents really have to bear in mind that for each of the needs listed in Section B, there should be a special education provision put in Section F. So it's worth kind of checking and making sure that you've got all of them covered. There is a lot more detail about that in the article that I've obviously provided. But the reason that this is so important is because if a provision is in Section F, then it must be provided and the local authority has the legal responsibility to ensure that it is. And if for any reason it isn't implemented, parents have got the option to appeal at tribunal. Okay. The last section I'll kind of go through is section I, because that's really important to parents. After the EHC assessment has been done, it will always get sent to parents in draft, and that bit is left blank. So at that point, parents can identify what they think would be the best school for their child. And it's worth bearing in mind that if an Ehcp is implemented, that can include special educational needs schools outside of their catchment area. So it doesn't have to be on their doorstep. Ultimately, though, it is the local authority who then decides the preferred educational setting and sets it out in that section when they finalise the plan. Okay. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's really useful, really useful. And as you say, there's people can refer to the article and read through this as well. Brilliant. So obviously everybody's circumstances are completely unique to them. What would you say a good EHCP looks like?
I think what's really important with any EHCP is that it has to really reflect the child and be utterly bespoke to them. There's no point having an EHCP which sets out support that the child doesn't need, but misses out the key things that they do. I think if the EHCP assessment is done correctly, it will help everybody involved to draw together the relevant information to get a good plan in place. But the key, I think, is to really think about every aspect of the day where your child needs support. And that can include getting to school, accessing the building safely, what happens at lunchtime, do they need to have somebody sit with them, do they need to have a quiet area to go to, all those kind of things. So it shouldn't just be just focusing on like the lessons or the structured timetable. It really should be every aspect of the day, and that can also be tailored. You know, there's lots of children that can't manage an entire school day as well. So, you know, it can be in there that they should have rest breaks or time out and things like that. So it's really, you know, think about the child and what do they need to get the most out of their time at school. And if that means that they don't do certain lessons, but they go for physiotherapy, fine. You know, that should be included.
Yeah. Brilliant. So you mentioned earlier that some parts can be appealed.
Yeah. So I think it's worth bearing in mind there's different stages to the appeals process. Some are really quite straightforward and some are a little bit more complex. But parents can appeal firstly if the local authority refuses to assess their child's needs for an EHCP. That is really straightforward because they have to assess ultimately. So if they refuse, definitely appeal. You'll definitely get through. It's more likely just a stalling tactic. Okay. Secondly, if the local authority refuses to issue an EHCP for their child after 16 weeks following the original request, then parents can appeal again to the Special Educational Needs and Disability Tribunal. That's also quite a straightforward one. But where it gets, I think, a little bit more complicated is if parents disagree with the content of the EHCP. Right. And that could be, you know, the local authority's preferred educational setting that they've ultimately decided at the end of the day. Yeah. So just to remind everyone, Parents can appeal against the contents of sections B, F and I within the Ehcp, which is why we went through those in a bit of detail. And when the local authority sends their final Ehcp decision, they have to set out in the covering letter how to appeal and give the timeframes.
Right.
But in reality, it's really quite straightforward, and parents just need to send what is called a SEND, so SEND tribunal appeal form, to the Special Educational Needs and Disability Tribunal, and you can download that from the government's website. I think what parents probably need to remember is that by law, local authorities have to provide what is reasonably required, and that can often get disputed as to what is reasonable and what the child does need. So quite often the tribunal is asked to resolve issues and make decisions as to what support is needed, along with what school the child should attend. So the last thing that I think parents really have got to bear in mind in relation to appeals, particularly ones about the choice of school, which are probably the most common, is it's not really advisable just to appeal against the choice of school or educational setting, because the tribunal's there to assess whether the placement can meet the child's needs and the provisions that are set out in the sections of the Ehcp. So it's much better really to address the shortfalls in those sections and present why the school cannot meet the educational needs and provisions set out in sections B and F, thereby making it unsuitable, rather than just saying we don't like this school, we want to appeal that choice. So a useful example, I think, could be if your child needs physiotherapy, and that includes hydrotherapy, and that has to be done twice weekly, and the preferred school doesn't have a hydrotherapy pool, well, that potentially makes it unsuitable, doesn't it? And there could be a school 5 miles away with a hydrotherapy pool, but they won't allow it to be used by anyone other than their own pupils for insurance purposes or whatever. So that could be that's a very obvious example of why the preferred school listed by the local authority isn't suitable and the school that the parents are suggesting is suitable, but it boils back down to what the child needs, as opposed to just we don't like that one, we want to go to that one. The time limits that parents have got to appeal is 2 months from the decision notice or 1 month from the date a mediation certificate is issued. So parents really should consider mediation as well, to try and resolve the issues between the local authority and themselves, and it buys more time. So that's quite a good tactic. Lastly, parents can challenge the Ehcp through judicial review. So if parents are unsatisfied with matters that don't relate to the content of the Ehcp, then you can go down the route of judicial review. So that could be due to issues like failure to deliver the provisions set out, failure to meet the deadlines for issuing an Ehcp, failure to carry out a social care assessment, those kind of things. Judicial review is basically a way of asking a court to decide whether the decisions of a public body, so here the local authority, were made in a lawful, fair and reasonable manner. If the court finds that they didn't act reasonably, then they can compel the local authority to act in a different way or remake their decision. I would say to parents that they're quite hard, and to succeed in an application for judicial review about special educational needs, you've really got to show that the local authority either doesn't have the power legally to make the decision or to take the action that you object to, or is under a legal duty to act or make a decision in a certain way and they're refusing to do that. I would say for that, I would advise them to get specialist advice from a solicitor as soon as possible, because legal aid in that circumstance is assessed in the child's name, not the parents'. So funding for those types of cases is much more likely to be available. So I definitely would encourage parents to kind of get help doing those, because that's really quite a tricky one to do on your own.
Great. So ideally, as you said, to go the mediation route first, and then go to tribunal if necessary.
Yeah, so I mean, the assessment itself, if it's done properly and done well, should result in an EHCP being implemented and there being absolutely no need to go to tribunal, and everything just working, beautifully until it gets reviewed 12 months down the line. But if for any reason parents do disagree with parts of the decision that have been made, and they feel that there's real grounds to kind of go to tribunal over it, then they really should do that. I think that is the kind of the key to parents. They have to persevere with this, and they have got to show a bit of determination in trying to get what they want for their child, because ultimately, if they get a good EHCP in place, then they've got all the support that their child needs to get the very best that they can get out of school time or their education, ultimately to help them become as independent as they possibly can. And I appreciate that every child is different and every child will get to different kind of stages, but they will always get the most that they can out of that time if they have those kind of provisions and that support that they need in place.
Yeah, and as you say, it's the parents know their child the best, so it's really important to think about those things and to put them into the form.
Yeah, and to take the time, to find some photos, to put things into Section A that are really going to help everybody, look at your child and go, well, this is who we're trying to support. This is who we're trying to make their time at school better. And I think that is worth doing, because it does put a face to
makes it real, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It perhaps makes it a tad harder for the local authorities to be so difficult.
Yes. That's brilliant. Was there anything else that you wanted to add in? Anything?
I don't think so. I think if there's any further questions that people have, I direct them to the article that I prepared, because that is a bit more detailed. So hopefully that would kind of answer anything that I've perhaps missed it in talking through it. But no, I think that probably covers what is important for parents in terms of getting an EHCP in place for their child.
Brilliant. And I'm sure there's loads of useful information in there that parents are going to really value. The article will be on Cerebra's website, so that's cerebra.org.uk, but we'll also pop a link with the information with this interview as well, so people can just click on that and have a read. So thank you again for your time this morning. And,
no, thank you. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Oh, brilliant. Well, you take care. Thanks again.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.